Hello everyone. Today I am going to talk about one of the important articles for FRM Part 2 exam for the 2018 curriculum under the current issues. So the article is written by Low Andrew W. and it talks about the garden gecko effect, which simply summarizes what is the role of culture in the financial industry, right? What role does culture play in the financial industry? So primarily, the first thing that we are going to talk about is what are the factors that influence the culture of the corporation. So right, is it a top down kind of scenario? Does it flow from top to bottom, or is it a bottom up kind of an approach? So we will be talking about the various factors that are influencing the culture of a corporation, and especially in the context of financial risk management, we will be looking at the role of culture and how do I really analyze the culture. So different financial practices that are being followed. What is the framework for analyzing the culture for the various practices as well as in various institutions? And in case the culture has to be changed or improved, what is the framework for that? So this article is completely revolving around culture. What role does it play as far as the financial risk management is concerned? Because it's just not numbers, it's just not uh, capital, it's much more than that. It's a complete risk oriented culture that we are talking of for effective risk management in the organizations. So we talk about, this article talks about the three layered factors. One, at the top, the leadership. Two, the composition of the group itself. And three, the environment. So the leadership, the composition of the group, and the environment. These are the three factors that are going to influence the culture. Normally also, if you see, when I talk about economics, we say that the more I am paid, the more I am motivated. Right? That's a general tendency among you, me, everyone else. We respond very quickly to incentives. I require a salary hike. I need more and more perks. So the same thing goes on the negative also. If I don't do well, I should be penalized. I may or I may not agree to it, but that is how the typical response, whether good or bad, individuals respond more and more to incentives, right? So then what is the meaning of culture here? But what we are saying is there are many scenarios where just not the monetary incentives, but the other things also influence how an employee behaves within an organization. Now that is where the culture is something that is, when I say a particular organization follows a particular work culture, it can come directly from the top. The CEO, the top bosses, whatever are the practices that are being set by the top management, they can be percolated to the employees. So authority or the top boss or that itself can influence the culture of the organization. So we look at three kinds of leaderships here. One, There could be a charismatic leader where through his mere personality, he's a kind of a different born leader kind of a person. So with the mere presence of his personality, he maintains the legitimacy. So that's one kind of leadership. Then we have a traditional leadership with established customs, practices, he implements them. So charismatic is a kind of a leaderly personality where someone typically through his acts, through his innovations, through his different approach to work, he attracts attention and legitimacy. In a traditional leadership, someone who implements well established practices, who goes by the book. Now, that kind of a leadership is also very much possible. And the third kind of a leadership is a legal rational relationship, which comes purely because I have been given a particular position. So, three forms of leadership, and what kind of leadership is displayed by the top boss will percolate to the employees in terms of how they really behave with respect to their practices within the organization. So, what is the level of approvals, disapprovals, how much of praise the employees are getting, how much of embarrassment they are getting for different kinds of work, also decides how the employees behave altogether. So, overall, the leadership of the organization is one of the key influencers of the culture. Then, the composition of a group is another key influence. So, who are the kinds of the people? So this we are the first one we talk about top to bottom kind of a flow. So how the top, what is the how the top is influencing the bottom. Whereas when I talk about from the composition perspective, how the bottom, the employee, every employee has his own set of ethics, morals, etc. Now depending on the kind of people who are being hired, the overall, when I add up, when I take the aggregation of the behaviors of the people who are being hired by the organization, that becomes the overall culture of the organization. So it's a amalgamation of the cultures of various individuals who are a part of the organization. So that's the composition part. Then when I say environment, the external factors come into picture. Competition, my culture changes, may change based on how my competitors are behaving. What is the economic climate? How simple or complex is the economic climate for doing business? And similarly, the regulator. How stringent is the regulator or how relaxed is the regulator? What kind of relaxations are there with respect to regulatory requirements? So all these things will influence the culture of the organization. But remember, whatever is the kind of a culture that an organization is following, it cannot eliminate all the risk, but definitely it can reduce the risk. So there is a good saying which says every culture has some kind of dangers or the other associated. The only thing is based on the culture, the dangers of the organization are ranked and prioritized. So both on what is good, what is bad, and what is more important, what is not. So based on the ranking, the set of activities are taken up accordingly. So that's how we can simplify the factors that are influencing the culture of the corporation. Then I want to talk about the role of culture in the context of financial risk management. Now, if you see, there is an interesting equation that talks about the risk appetite that is typically being taken by an individual. What is the risk appetite? What is the amount of risk that a person is going to take? Individual I. Now you could see that it is a factor, it is influenced by various elements. To what extent he is being rewarded, what is the potential loss in case the action that he has taken has not resulted in positive, has gone negative, to what extent his career is at risk, what is the competitive pressure, what is the peer pressure, his own self-image, regulatory environment. There are various factors that are influencing what is the level of risk a person is going to take within a financial institution or for a financial practice. So we have to understand such a kind of a equation, and depending on, so which means there is a lot of person related features. There are more of environmental related factors which are definitely going to influence how much risk a particular organization is going to take. So when I'm talking about any financial risk management protocol, we talk about this acronym called Simon, where the select part. The first step is the select. What are all, when I'm talking about portfolio returns, right? I want to generate a particular portfolio. I want to generate X return. Now, first I'm trying to identify what are the most important risk factors for me if I have to generate this kind of a return on my portfolio. So, I'm identifying all kinds of risk factors that are driving the portfolio returns. Then, how do I optimize that? How do I reduce the risk? So, all these factors may not be linear. We can have many kinds of non-linear relationships also existing across. The risk that might be driving the portfolios may not be linear. So, which means I have to really understand what should be optimized. Should my overall risk, which I measure, let's say through standard deviation or variance, do I need to minimize the overall risk, or do I want to maximize the return to risk kind of a ratio? So, what is first thing, I'm identifying what are the major risk factors driving my portfolio returns. Then I'm looking at identifying the objective function that needs to be optimized along with what all constraints are there towards this process. Then as a part of measurement M, I want to measure what are all the statistical laws of motion that are governing the portfolio return. So once I have done that, I'm optimizing the objective function. I'm actually implementing it. I'm trying to solve for it. I'm optimizing the objective function, and I have already put out the portfolio governing dynamics. So I'm optimizing the objective function with respect to return dynamics, with respect to constraints that I have identified, so that my optimal portfolio is getting created. So I'll get portfolio weightages, hedging positions, so they are being solved for. So remember, this is not a one-time exercise. It has to be a repeated exercise, which means I keep monitoring it, and any kind of a change in the system that is going to come up, I have to take care of it. I have to make the necessary changes and again repeat the whole Simon framework as identified. So there is a selection, there is an identification, measurement, optimization, and noticing. So that is what we typically talk about whenever we bring in culture in the context of financial risk management. Are we going ahead in terms of observing all these steps? Do we have a framework to evaluate the risks and optimize the positions through this kind of a framework? So this is something that will definitely play a role in effective financial risk management practice. Now, so what is the framework for analyzing culture? A few important points that I want to look at is corporate culture propagates itself like an economic phenomenon. So every individual, they want to maximize some quantity. So it could be either organization's profits, or it could be either reducing the organization's risk. So value to the shareholders, there could be many such kind of quantities that every organization wants, or every individual wants to maximize through their behavior. Employees, in case they have the traits, now we are trying to link employee with the corporation, with the organization. Employees whose traits are more or less similar to the corporate culture. Right now I have joined an organization X. X has a very high risk taking culture, but I am not a risk taking person. Then these two are not matching. But let's say if I am also a risk taking person, my traits match closely with the corporate culture. In that case, I'll do well in the organization, which means the fitment of my traits with the organization culture should definitely be looked at to ensure that an employee fits to the organization culture quite effectively, right? So if the employee's traits are more fit to the corporate culture, they'll do well because they are able to adjust very comfortably to the environment. That's an important point when I have to look at how do I analyze the culture with respect to a particular financial institution. We also need to understand the corporate culture generally defends itself. What it means is, let's say I'm dissatisfied with the current status of the organization. I want the status to be changed. And there are so many such kind of people like me who feel that the current status of the organization is having its own flaws and it requires a revamp, but it might very well be possible that the organization may not be able to change at all. So that is where a corporate culture may defend itself. So if I have to really change the culture of an organization, there is a massive effort that has to go into it, because it's not a few people's dissatisfaction. So it is a mega effort that goes into the changing of a culture. So whenever there is a kind of a financial failure, you can very well link with the culture of the organization. Are they more and more cautious? Are they more risk taking? You can very well look at in the financial failures. They can very well be linked to the culture of the organization. Any big errors cropping up, any big malpractices coming up, any frauds coming up, you can very well look up to the culture that is being followed by the employees within the organization. And some cultures, they actively conceal their flaws and irregularities. They don't want the outside world to know more and more about the kind of negative things that they are doing within the organization. Even the regulators will not be aware of them. We have seen so many financial frauds that broke up in the last minute because there is a lot of concealing right from the top. So within the corporation itself, we see so many things are hidden off from the employees. So many things are hidden off from one layer to the other. So the transparency versus opaqueness, right from the top, also determines how transparent the company is with respect to the various financial practices. In case I want to improve the culture, first of all, we feel that determining the origin of the culture, ethics, morality. Why do I really need to understand all these things about the individual? But sometimes going into such a kind of a depth to try to understand really makes a difference. What we need to understand is certain cultural norms are very, very common to every one of us. They are coming to us from various generations, across the generations, across the species. There's a lot. Even if I am a Indian or an Asian or an American, there are a certain set of cultures, traits that are passed right from the top, right from my ancestors, and they are very common across all the species, across all the generations. And when we look at from the perspective of financial market dynamics, it's basically people, right? There is a survival for the fittest that is happening. The resources are very scarce. Everyone wants to fight for those set of resources. So, in that process, people are trying to adjust themselves to the environment. So, there is something of the past that has come with them. They want to see whether they can continue with the past or adapt themselves to the current environment. So, that is what could play a role. What is the level of adaptability? That is also something that could play a role in terms of improving or changing the culture of an organization. Individual behavior that appears to be coordinated is simply the result of certain common factors. Right? As we said, they come from generations, species. So, whatever is the behavior that is displayed by the individual is simply the result of certain common factors in the environment. So, that is where we talk about from the perspective of systematic risk, herd mentality, because the culture is common across the various generations. So, we cannot move away from that so easily. So, this is what the article talks of. In case you have any further queries on the same, you can very well get in touch with me by giving me a call on the number that I have given below, or you can even send in an email at the email address provided below. Thanks a lot for listening to this session. Thank you very much.